thank you. Today is the March 3rd Georgetown ISD Board Workshop, and we are going to lead it off. I'm going to hand it to you, Mr. President.
Great. We have a need to go into closed session today, so we're going to go ahead and officially call the meeting to order. The time is 3:05, and I call this meeting of Georgetown Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code 551. With no public comments, we're going to move immediately into closed session for the discussion of purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. Under the authority of the Texas Government Code 551, Subchapter D, the board will go into closed session at 3:06 to discuss real property. And I call this meeting of the Georgetown Independent School District back to order. Let the record reflect that one of the board members is still present. And with that, we'll move straight into some action items. And I'll turn it over to Wes.
No, I got it.
Oh, Dr. Padaville,
Mr. President, we recommend that you authorize superintendent to contract to purchase these tracts of land, authorize the board secretary to execute a certificate of resolutions memorializing the board's actions.
All right, we'll entertain a motion.
I so move.
I have a motion.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any comments, questions? All right, motion carries. Moving on, we have one more action item today before we get to the actual workshop, and that is relating to the election. Dr. Pettit.
Mr. President, I'm happy to announce that all three candidates that were up for election were unopposed. And that election was supposed to be held on May 3rd, 2025, so I recommend that you move to accept the certification of unopposed candidates and order a cancellation of election for the Georgetown ISD Board of Trustees in the May 3rd, 2025 election.
Perfect.
I so move.
Motion
I second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thankfully, motion carries. Since I was on it. All right, and with that, I will take a motion to adjourn and return to the workshop.
So moved.
And
Second.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, back to you, Dr. Padville.
All right, so today we're going to have budget workshop number 3 before our Chief Financial Officer, Jennifer Hanna, takes it from here. I just want to kind of paint a picture of context. So the legislative session kicked off in January, and now that we're almost 2 months in, we have the reality that Ms. Hanna is going to start to paint for us, that there's no real adjustment that makes up for the inflation increase that we were talking about all year. And so now begins a conversation of about 3 months of painful but necessary decisions that our team is going to need to make, and this is the beginning of that conversation. What we're going to do is let you know what has taken place in the legislature. We're going to talk about what we are early projections of revenue and expenditures, and then we're going to start to talk about what would it take to get to a balanced budget. I want us to keep in mind that when we talk about what does it take, this doesn't even include a compensation increase. This is strictly talking about getting us as close to back in the black as possible. So we have budget workshop number 3 here in March. We're going to have a conversation, listen to your feedback, listen to your questions. This team and many who are not here at this little circle is going to work together to bring you a cleaned up version of what we propose going for the 25-26 budget in April. And then we will rinse and repeat and do that same process to have a conversation with you in May where we get closer to an adopted budget for next school year. So all that said, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Hanna.
Thank you. As Dr. Padaville said, the legislative session kicked off in January. They're off to a fast start. There's many bills being filed. The last day of the legislative session is June 2nd. The House and Senate, what we're seeing, are doing very different bills. They're coming from two different angles, and so at the end of the session, those will intertwine and merge. But at this time, we're seeing they're very, very spread apart on some issues, particularly school finance. It is too early. We had hoped to run some what-if scenarios, but we just feel like it's just too early. There's still a lot that has not settled at all. So just to talk about the major school finance bills, both the House and the Senate agreed on the state budget amounts that will be set aside for issues for public education. So new funding for the foundation school program, they agreed on $4.85 million additional funding for that. Additional property tax relief, which is primarily going to be increases to the homestead exemption, and also we'll see some more property tax compression, which means the tax rate will go down. That's worth $3.5 billion. School safety, they both agree they need to put more into school safety. That's $0.4 billion, and then vouchers, they have $1 billion set aside. So we're going to talk a little bit about the foundation school program, the way that the Senate and the House are approaching that. So the most notable bill in the Senate, on the Senate side, it's Senate Bill 26. You'll hear a lot about it. It's a big bill. And Senator Crichton introduced it. So for GISD, what that would do, it creates a teacher retention allotment for districts with over 5,000 students. So we're over 5,000 students. So we would get $2,500 for each classroom teacher with 3 to 4 years of experience, and $5,500 for each classroom teacher with 5 or more years of experience. And this is very good for our teachers. What we notice, though, it's not covering our teachers that have 0, 1, or 2 years. And it's also not covering any other district employees. So it's specifically targeted at those two groups of teachers solely. So for smaller districts with less than 5,000 students, those amounts double. But again, it's only for teachers with 3 or more years of service. So if you go down to the second bullet, it would allow for the children of teachers to be eligible for state-funded pre-K, which we do think that would be a great benefit for our teachers. So that's a good thing. And they also are proposing increases to the teacher incentive allotment. So that also would help our teachers.
Did you want us to wait to the end to ask you, or jump in at any time?
I would say jump in.
Yeah, you can ask a question after this slide if you want, but the one thing I would just add, which is probably blindingly obvious to everybody, is nothing about this funding flows directly to the district budget, right? So if we're talking about, let's say, a deficit budget of $3 million, it's still a deficit budget of $3 million. It's just that this funding is directly flowing to teachers for that $2,500 and $5,000 increase. Ms. Blank.
Well, Bill, I think that's wonderful. However, we're surrounded by districts that have less than 5,000 students. And I see this as a poaching kind of thing. If they could go to a smaller district in easy driving distance of here and make $10,000. So this, to me, is a double-edged sword. It's very positive for our teachers. And yes, I agree. I wish they would just give us a pot of money and let us decide how that's distributed for our aides and our librarians and diags.
And it supports teachers.
Yes, because everything is for a certified teacher, and that leaves everybody else out.
Could you tell me, Jennifer, understand what's the rationale between the difference of the 5,000, over 5,000, under 5,000? What's the rationale that they presented that, because that's a vast difference amount of money.
What I've heard are two things. One is that is targeted for rural districts primarily, and so they're it's in an effort to
Win those votes.
make
Sure,
rural
vouchers.
districts accept this. And secondly, typically they do have a lower pay salary schedule in smaller, more rural districts than they would like in an urban district. So it's sort of two things.
Abbott needs the rural Republicans not to block his voucher bill again, so he's buying their votes. In my humble opinion.
Yeah, you're not.
Let's go ahead and move to the next slide.
So if we look at the house side, and as you were saying, Ms. Blank, this is more of an omnibus type bill, where they are looking at different areas. I only highlighted one slide worth of areas. There's actually, if you go and look at House Bill 2, there are lots of different items in there. It's a pretty large bill. But what it would do is increase our basic allotment from $6,160 to $6,380. So that's a $220 increase in the basic allotment. It also will have a requirement that we use 40% of that increase for compensation, and then of that 40%, 75% is for teachers.
So I just want to expand on that bullet just for a second here. So on the first one, a $220 increase would be about $3.1 million total in increased revenue for the school district. However, 40% of it has to go directly to compensation increase, mostly to teachers, right? So if we take out 40% of that increase for us, that's about 1.23 million, which leaves us about 1.8 million. And so I only illustrate that for you because as we talk about a deficit, if this comes to fruition, we're seeing an added revenue increase of 1.8 million, which still doesn't get us to where we need to be when we're talking about operating a district budget.
And $1.2 million for teachers is less than a 1% pay raise?
$1 million, it would take a $1,000 increase to teachers.
$1
would take
million
$1.1 million.
Teachers and staff.
That's right.
It would be split.
That's right.
So around 1%, give or take.
It wouldn't be very.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah. So it does have also some other points that might increase our funding a bit. Special education funding, they're looking at changing the way that they're funding it now. Instead of intensity of services, it would go to the instructional arrangement, which would give us more money. However, we currently don't record our services in that way, so that's going to take some time, not just for Georgetown ISD, but for the state to implement any kind of increase because it's changing the way that we report our data. There are a couple of special allotments that it is both adding and increasing. I only put 4 of them on here. There's actually even more than this. But new would be a fine arts allotment. I think I saw $40 per student. I mean, some of these kind of are rough numbers, but then there's a high school advising allotment, which would pay for a high school advisor on each campus. We already get our compensation, our comp ed allotment, but they're talking about increases to that, which would be helpful. And then our CCMR outcomes bonus, they would increase those weights, so that would be additional funding as well. The one point in here that I wanted to make sure we talked about is that it also appears to make significant reductions to the hold harmless funding that we've been receiving for the last few years when they've done the tax rate compression and the over 65. So that flows in as part of our formula, and there are now, I think, 4 hold harmless calculations. And there will be another one when this session's over, so there'll be 5. So they are finding that that's very cumbersome to calculate. We're having, there's some issues with calculating that data. And so they're talking about simplifying that, but if they were to do that, that could hurt us in the future because it could lessen the whole harmless we're getting. A lot of people have noted that this is an issue, and so I think they're trying to make sure that that gets taken care of.
So we lose the hold harmless?
We could,
Or
part of it.
What they pull back could be reduced as well? Like the Robin Hood?
No, it wouldn't
No.
affect capture. Well, it really wouldn't affect recapture. No, they haven't talked about reducing recapture.
I have real mixed feelings about the increase in homestead exemption. Personally, it definitely will help my taxes, but knowing that that's money not going to the school district.
It's true. It does help to reduce recapture because we're not bringing in as many taxes. So for a district like Georgetown, it really is not a big issue. So I agree with you, you know, for some districts, they would be bringing in less tax. But I think by giving tax relief, it's a more clear picture to taxpayers of what they're actually paying to school districts.
So we would pay less to the state? That would be good to
Because
know.
if you think about our cup,
Yeah.
our cup would be less full by our local property taxes, so.
But do we keep more?
Well, and it's all the way the weights and the formulas,
Uh-huh.
it's not as clear as it would be, as, you know, you'd like it to be, but, yeah. The property tax relief in general does not hurt us, because
Okay.
it just means we're sending less back to the state.
Good to know.
All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes.
Okay, so we are still early in the process, but what we have landed on some preliminary budget assumptions for now. I do want to point out that the 3 shaded areas in the 25-26 column are very likely to change. All 3 of those will probably change after we get through the legislative session. So we are working with, you know, basically the best information that we have right now. But if we look at that second column, the 25-26 column, we just kind of start at the top. We are projecting student enrollment of 14,060. That's the demographer's projection that he gave us in the third quarter report. That is a 1.2% increase in enrollment, so from this current year. If we use a 93% adjusted for pre-K attendance rate for average daily attendance, we are projecting to use a 13,076 ADA for our funding. So then if we go down, that's a 93% of our average daily attendance. If we go down to the next section, which is property values, based on what we know preliminarily, we haven't gotten our certified estimate yet from the Williamson Central Appraisal District. So we have projected that there'll be a 7% increase in our property taxes, in our property values. That is a smaller increase than what we've seen in the last 5 years. So we do believe we're going to see a smaller increase. So we're projecting 7%. So before the freeze, that's about 24.6 billion. And we estimate that we collect 99% of our taxes. That's what we use every year. So if we keep going down, the basic allotment, we are assuming current law, which is 6,160. We don't know where that number is going to land, so for now we're just using 6,160. We are going to get an increase in our golden penny. I know we've talked about golden pennies and copper pennies in here. We have 8 golden pennies.
Explain it to us again like we're a 3-year-old.
Okay, so so the golden pennies are, we do pay recapture on those pennies. Most districts have at least 5. We have 8. In order to get into our copper pennies, that's when we would do a VATRE, which is a voter-approved tax rate election to get in. So we have no copper pennies. Some districts do, so they would be getting additional.
What's the difference between a copper and a gold?
A copper you would pay recapture on, golden you wouldn't.
And how do we get these pennies?
We have a tax rate, we have a voter election.
And it can only be in November?
It can only be in November.
So we would have to make a decision between now and November if we want to go out to the voters and ask them to approve some form of VTAR. And I think several districts last year ran them,
Mm-hmm.
but most of them failed, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right.
Some passed and some failed. We are planning to give you the timeline and the bullet points of what we would need to do if that's what we desire to do, because there are some requirements that we need to do before we would even consider calling one of those elections. We are planning to get you that information just so that we have a full picture of what might be available. And then just that very last line, the tax rate, just as we talked, is probably going to be compressed. Right now, we're looking at 0.6682. for the M&O rate, and then 0.3575, which would remain the same for the INS rate. So that total tax rate would be 10257. It very likely will be lower than that.
I've got a quick question. Does the demographer have a projection of what the vouchers are going to, how they're going to affect our attendance yet?
Not that directly.
Okay.
In some real casual conversations with the demographer, I don't think that we'll see an immediate impact here in Georgetown, but the long-term impact is something that would definitely factor into the projections.
Okay.
So using these projections, this is our first, basically our first very early estimate of our revenues. And we're starting with those assumptions that we are making. If we look at the right-hand column, that is next year's revenue scenario. The left-hand column, the first column, is where we are currently this year. So if we start at the top, revenues based on all the assumptions that we're making, we are saying could be 168.4 million. We're going to send 18.3 million back to the state right off the top in recapture. If we go down to operating expenditures, that is the current year's budgeted operating expenditures. We are just now consolidating with our campuses and our departments, and also going through all our staffing. So as we, each month as we get closer, so by the end of March, we're hoping for April to have a better number. But for now, again, this is very early. This is just saying the budget for this year is this. And so we haven't consolidated or done any, we haven't gotten our budgets ready for this year, for 25-26. So that is just kind of a place marker. But we do know that looking at with our staffing, we've talked with our campuses and looking at our staffing projections for growth, FTE positions at the elementary, we are thinking that we need approximately 1.2 million. At the secondary level, that would be another $1 million. And then we have not put anything in for compensation increases or for an increase to our employee health insurance contribution. We did go ahead and put that next line down, inflation at 10%. We don't know. Like I said, we have not really been able to get our budgets. We're not quite there yet, but we do know that we'll probably be seeing an increase in property insurance, and we've been, some of our vendors have told us what we should be expecting.
So Jennifer, I just want to point out to everyone looking here, the only difference between these two bottom line numbers are these 3 rows right there. It's inflation, and then it's secondary staffing and elementary staffing. So you'll see that our student population hasn't grown exponentially, so you may have the question like, so where do those millions come from? It's really to meet the needs of greater than expected enrollment that we had this year, plus a growing special education population. So if we really want to get tactical about meeting the needs of our special needs learners, it would take additional staffing there. However, those are soft numbers that haven't been set in stone. So as we talk about getting to a balanced budget, those are some of the painful conversations we have to have too about what does appropriate, how do we meet the needs of kids? How do we make sure caseloads for our staff are well distributed, but at the same time work towards a balanced budget?
Jim, with the property tax adjustments, will it change that 18 million?
Yes.
For recapture this
If
year,
property-
could it go
if
down?
the revenues go down, then the recapture will go down, yes. So that, again, early preliminary look at the budget for next year without making any, we've not made any cuts. We're looking at a deficit of 3.7 million, which would be 21% of our fund balance, of our projected ending fund balance.
If nothing changed.
If nothing changed, as it sits. And and that would be with no compensation increases.
That's right.
So, to look at a couple of options to reduce the deficit, we have talked about some of these options for the last couple of months at our budget workshops and also with our staff. But we've kind of gotten a little bit more with some dollar amounts to what it would look like if we did, for example, reduce some elementary positions. If we reduced 5 assistant principals from the elementaries at $75,000 each, that would be $375,000. We go down to reduce other positions, which would be both at Hammerlin and district-wide positions, which estimate of $300,000. If we were to increase our secondary class sizes to 29 to 1 for the middle schools, that ratio would give us a $1.26 million savings, and then at the high school, that would be a $1.38 million savings. If we were to go in and cut department and campus budgets by approximately 5%, that would be $411,000, which this is an illustration of cuts that we could make if we were to do so. That would get us to a balanced budget.
Just on this slide, but on the next slide, we have more options that are over and above this as well. Can you go back real quick, Jennifer? How much, when we talk about cutting department and campus budgets by 5%, how much did we cut last year?
Percentage-wise, well, we went back twice to ask for cuts, and
Yeah.
it was close to 10%.
10%. So we cut 10% from campus department budgets last year. We go back and ask for another 5%.
That was primarily department budgets, not campus.
But without losing any services last year. We didn't shut any programs down. We didn't
No,
do-
sir. Okay, let's go
We
to.
made a lot of
I
other
have a
cuts,
question.
but not in programs.
So I appreciate this slide. Devin, maybe you can speak to how sustainable would that be, those cuts right there for personnel, like the middle school cuts and the high school cuts?
You know, this year, we had the reality of everyone saying, I feel like we are asking people to do more with less, and people's workloads increased. This would just add to that sense, right? At some of our Title I elementary schools, we have 2 assistant principals, and those people are really boots on the ground that are able to support our teachers. But when we talk about getting to a balanced budget, it's hard not to talk about administration as well, right? Like we can't have conversations about increasing class size without talking about administrative roles as well. I think the astronomical number there is the secondary class size, but we wanted to paint a picture of really what would it take to get to that. But this doesn't include what you're going to see on the second slide, which would contribute to bringing that number of class size down, because we know to the greatest degree possible we want to protect class size.
And what's our secondary number now?
25.
25.
So that's-
Jennifer, do you want to illustrate some of these other numbers?
Yes, so these are other options that we have been discussing to reduce the deficit. We haven't landed any planes, but these have been being discussed. We have been meeting about high school scheduling. We don't feel that we could make any major scheduling changes for next year, but if we looked at 26, 27, by making some changes, we could achieve a $1.7 million savings. We could look at other teacher support positions in addition to the administration positions that we looked at on the prior slide. These are the types of positions of interventionists, learning design coaches, librarians. That could be a $1.18 million yield. And then if we didn't, another way that we could help to offset any more costs would be no approval of additional FTE positions. We do currently have a process for businesses to request additional FTE support, and we would just not be able to approve any of those. I didn't put it up here, but there are other programs also that we could be looking at, but that would be affecting, that would be a student program.
So that high school scheduling, does that mean cutting out block scheduling?
Yeah.
That could be, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, I was reading this last night, and as much as I, been married to a coach for 30 years and love football, but what I noticed when I looked at this is there's not, where our cuts we're looking at are our core academic programs. And that's why we are here. That is our core mission for this school district. But when you look at where we're looking at possible cutting, librarians, interventionists, which help with the reading, but we're not discussing athletics, we're not discussing extracurricular, we're not discussing some things that, while they're really important, and I totally agree with having those programs for kids because that creates a sense of inclusion and belonging for kids. But is it the priority over our academic program where we're working so hard to get to an appropriate level that they're not in this group of what we're looking at? And would there be more interest in the budgeting in our state if we started talking about cutting athletic programs and we started cutting extracurricular programs? I know that the parents would be at the state capitol in two shakes. But when we're sitting here looking at our core academic program, I just feel like we have to broaden our thinking with regard to this issue.
Ms. Malden, I really appreciate you speaking up and, taking two things out of this. I think for us, as a team of 8, we have to have a conversation about what is that student experience we want to protect. Like, I'm not just talking about athletics. The overall student experience of what a student experiences in Georgetown ISD that we want to protect as we make these ugly decisions. But at the same time, we could put some math together about if athletic programs were removed from the school day, what kind of savings would that be? And they would be a significant savings. And so those are things that we can talk about.
Do we have an inventory of the programs and kind of cost utilization?
We have budgets because we do budget by program, so we could look at budgets. As far as utilization, that would
If
probably.
we have 10 kids in a thing and it's costing us $1 million versus having 100 kids in a thing costing us $1 million,
Yeah.
you get rid of the 10 kids program and apologize. Like, do we have that structure yet? Because I feel like we're gonna need it.
That's something that
I'm
we
gonna
can,
agree with Jen, like, we can cut redundancies or programs if we don't need however many foreign language programs we have, we can reduce that to 2 to take back and give to our core programs
Yeah.
and to save some of the extracurriculars that let kids feel included, especially with where mental health is these days with these kids. The more of those programs we can save, there's benefit outside of just classroom learning for some of them. But I do have to agree, like, we can't look at impacting our ability to teach and educate without looking at all the extra stuff we're doing for kids.
we'll bring you program utilization and cost into the April board meeting, or the board workshop rather.
And that will include electives, different languages.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have that enrollment.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's
which
gonna,
students-
you're gonna have to break it down for me, like, this is what the federal government state says we have to have, and this is all the extra stuff we're offering. And then the other one would be our CT programs that we're not deriving to certification to get that benefit of certification. It's kind of those underutilized programs that we just haven't had a chance to develop. We may need to start understanding if we're ever gonna get those developed, and if not, redirect and have those conversations for some of that, even though that is my favorite part of our education system. I just think we have to take a real look at it.
Mr. President, I really appreciate you giving us the latitude to explore those options, because the reality is we do not embrace these hard decisions now, the decisions that we're gonna have to make next year in 25, 26 will be worse. They will be worse. So we definitely need to talk about these things that we haven't talked about in Georgetown.
Yeah, and really I'll just close with what we also have been talking about are ways to increase our revenues, because we know there's always a cut. So we really have also tried to focus on increasing more revenue. We've worked very, very hard this year to increase attendance, and we'll continue to do that. We do have our long-range planning committee looking at these other items, the master plan for our vacant facilities that don't have students in them, a master plan for potentially a centralized pre-K. We could get some efficiencies from there, and some additional funding. Accepting out-of-district transfers is something that our long-range planning committee is looking at. So those would be ways that we could increase our revenue. And then, of course, that very last bullet, just waiting to see if we can get some more funding as well from the legislature. And so,
Even if we accept out-of-district students, we would do it at the capacity that's empty. And so at this point, we'd be looking at lower capacity campuses like Frost, San Rita, or San Gabriel. And everything else doesn't seem like there's capacity to save.
yeah,
So best case scenario, you're talking about adding 300 kids to our district
probably best
and creating
guess.
a lot of administration around that. 300 kids at $6,000 is $180,000.
No,
I mean, it's not gonna move the needle, just to be real. It's great that we're looking at those things, but unless I'm missing something, it doesn't seem like,
It doesn't solve our problems.
no. It will help with utilization in the campus, and if it can protect us from having to, in the future, close a campus, it may be a much more relevant conversation. But $180,000 doesn't get us anywhere at this point, unless we have other campuses that we're just not filling today.
Well, a $220 increase,
Oh, it's an insult, but
that is basically an insult.
it's not even keeping up with inflation.
No, I would highly encourage every parent, every employee
Wait, we have a slide for
to
that.
contact. We'll get a cute little form letter back. I've gotten a few.
But we wanted to include the contact information for our
Yes.
local elected representatives, because, I mean, really, it's gonna take your persistent voice and the voices of our parents and community to just help public schools continue to operate. Not even thrive, just operate.
Just to keep the doors open.
And I just have to underscore this one more time. None of this conversation includes a compensation increase. We are just trying to talk about how to balance our budget.
That's all we have.
We've talked before about like one-time payments to staff or adjustments for higher need areas like allotments or those things. So if we do this work, that we don't have a choice. When we do this work for the budget, if something on the backside happened with legislature and there was a windfall, legally we're great. We can just go back, give that to the teachers and staff how we see fit. Or if we had to cut a program that we feel is vital, replace it at that point with that additional money. So just if we can't pass it day one while we're waiting, we could earmark that money forward.
Right, there'd be two, maybe even more things that we would do. One, obviously, we can amend the budget at any time, so we would do a budget amendment as soon as any news information here. And then the other thing is with our compensation plan, for the next year, we can make sure that we have certain legal language included that would help us to make that.
So that was gonna be kind of my second part of this. Can we pass a increase without funding an increase like the state does?
Like a conditional. I mean, we can work with our attorney.
I'm just curious because I think it gives you a real picture of what the budget should be.
Right.
And if we can pass those numbers and know what the true numbers should be, it gives us more tools when we go to advocate with legislature instead of waiting and 0 or 1%.
Yeah.
It's not helping.
Right,
you know.
and one of the things also is kind of against us is the fact that we are a July 1 school district. September 1 school districts have a little bit more room, a few more months to get information. So we'll be passing a budget in June with probably still quite a bit of unknown
Just curiosity, what determines what our fiscal year is? Like, why are regional?
Traditionally, all school districts were September 1st, and then the legislature allows districts to change their fiscal year. So Georgetown, we changed ours probably years ago. There's pros and cons to both, but I would say one benefit is when we are July 1, that means when the teachers come back in August, their budgets are open, whereas if you're September 1, the teachers come back in August, it's like, we don't have any money until, so it is better for the campuses to have that money available when they get back in August.
Trustees, do you have any other questions or things you want to share with us
No.
as we do this work?
I think we just want to express appreciation for you guys' willingness to
Absolutely.
have the conversation and do the hard work, and it's uncomfortable. I mean, we pretty much get to go home, and you guys have to go back into the campuses in your office and continue these really hard conversations. So we do really appreciate you guys doing it, and I don't think we would encourage the conversations at the level we are if we didn't feel like it was going to be necessary, unfortunately, in the future. So I think the reality is we're going to make tough decisions. It's just what tough decision, and the more guidance you guys can give us, the better tough decision we can make on your behalf. So I just hopefully encourage everybody, campus level and everything, to filter back up to you guys and give some real input. Otherwise, you're going to be mad on the backside without ever having a voice in the conversation. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this concludes our board workshop.
Awesome.